Carolyn Dube here. What's the play for today? Well, today I'm using Grafix Gold Shrink Film. Now this stuff, if you have never seen this stuff shrink, it is so much fun to watch it contort and go through all that it does as it changes sizes. Now how much does it change size? Well, if I've got a stamped image this size, it becomes this size. Well, I know I said I was going to work with the gold, but I'm also going to work with the silver shrink film too. So this is what the full sheets look like, and now I'm going to stamp some images on them. The ink pad that I'm using is an archival ink. It's a waterproof ink, but it wasn't really designed for super slick surfaces. Something like a StazOn ink also works, but I can't find my StazOn black ink pad, so I'm going to work with this one. Now, if I had my StazOn ink pad, I would just stamp it, give it a moment or two, and it would be dry and ready to work with. When I'm using the archival ink, I've got to give it some more dry time. Now, it will never be really permanent on the plastic here until it's heated. Now, once this stuff shrinks down, this ink is on there solidly. That's why it's an easy substitution for me if I can't find my other ink pad. So I'm going to set these aside to dry and come back after they are dry to the touch. So now they're dry enough for me to handle, so what I'm going to do is just trim around them with scissors. Now the film is really easy to cut at this point with scissors. I want to do any kind of cutting, trimming, anything like that before I shrink it. Once it's been shrunken, it's very difficult to actually cut or trim it. I don't think I actually have anything in my studio that I could use for that. But I don't need to worry about that because I haven't shrunken these yet. And when I look at a rubber stamp to use with the shrink film, I love ones that have little areas that I could cut out. That way it gives it that extra little oomph or pop when it's done shrinking. So what I'm doing right now is using a craft knife and a cutting mat, and I'm cutting out just a couple of small areas on this cassette. I'm going to show my age here, but back when I was in high school, cassettes were the be-all and end-all, the way that we had our music, and it was so cool because we could actually make our own mixtapes. So one of the things my friends and I loved to do together was make mixtapes and swap them around. And every now and then we'd splurge and buy the really, really good cassette tapes. Those were the ones that were gold. And that's why I chose to use the gold shrink film with this one, because those were the best tapes to make mixes on. So I really love that I have this rubber stamp number 1, and I can use it as full size, but that I can also get more mileage out of my rubber stamps by shrinking them on the shrink film. Now I could just shrink them now, but I want to give each one of them a personal touch. And of course I want to put a title on that cassette tape. I'm calling this one 80s Mixtape, and I am not going to be nearly as critical of my handwriting because once it shrinks down, it looks so much better. I'm going to add some color onto the camera. I am going to depart from reality here. If I'd shrunken it just with the silver film, then it would have looked closer to what a real camera looks like, but I had to get the rainbow on here. So I am coloring in different areas of the design with a bunch of different colors here using the Pitt pens, and that color is going to intensify when it shrinks. Now this process is also extremely forgiving. If you're like me and impatient and don't really like to stay precisely inside the lines, this makes it so easy. Because once it shrinks down, it's not going to show exactly where every little thing was. You'll see when you see these shrunken how different they really look. And because I'm coloring it while it's larger, it's so much easier to color than if I color it once it's shrunken. So once I've got them all colored the way I want them, and now it's time to bring in the craft heat gun, and I'm going to shrink them. Just by putting the heat right there on them, then they curl up, move around as they go through that shrinking process, and when it's all done, it will lay mostly flat. Now I say mostly flat because I'm going to help it get that last little bit of super flat by just putting a book on top of it, and that'll give it that little bit of flattening. Now I've also got a bamboo skewer there. That kind of acts as my finger to hold things in place while I'm using the heat gun. I don't actually want to put my finger under there because the whole thing actually gets pretty hot. Well, here I've zoomed in so you can see the shrunken size versus the original size. The last thing I like to add to some of these is putting on a little bit of shine on top of them. I'm going to be using glossy accents, but once I unclog it, I've got a pin that I just stick in the nozzle, and that'll open it back up so I can get some of that clear, shiny glue right on there. I'm going to spread it around with my finger, and that's going to create a really glossy, shiny top to this. I'm also going to do that to each one of the paint tubes, but I'm not going to do it to the cassette tape. And why is that? Well, the cassette tapes usually had more of a matte look to me. They didn't have the shiny look, so that's why I'm choosing to keep that one just the way it is. And the next thing that I have to do is the absolute biggest challenge for me almost every time I create something. And that is to give it plenty of time to dry, so just to leave it alone and to let that glossy accents dry. So here's what they look like when they're almost dry. I have so much glossy accents on that camera, it's going to take it a little bit longer to dry. Shockingly, the more glue that you put on it, the longer it takes to dry. So now that you've got these made, what can you do with them? Oh hell, what can't you do with them? If you like to make scrapbook pages, you can make your own dimensional embellishments to put on there. Of course, by using whatever colors you're using in your scrapbook page, you can make it coordinate perfectly. What about if you're making a mixed media art journal page? Could you put these on there? Absolutely. Card making? Certainly. Jewelry, adding on little bits here and there? You bet this would all work for that. So take a look at your stash of rubber stamps and see which ones you want to see shrunken down. You can learn more about graphic shrink film at grafixarts.com.